project. It has a long name, but a good acronym. It's the school project. I say ScienceCore Heuristics for Open Science Outcomes and Learning. I swear the ChatGPT didn't help come up with that either. No, it's helping with some other things. So our project, the school project, it's part of the NASA TOPS initiative. I'll describe a bit more in a moment. Part of the TOPS T program, building online curriculum. But before I dive too deep into that, let's do what we're supposed to do on Slido and learn a little bit about the audience. So if you could go to Slido, we have 3 short questions. You know, while we're answering this question, I'll just say a little bit about myself. My name's Kit McManus. I'm a GIS developer at a research center called Season. That's at Columbia University. Spend a good amount of my time acting as the assistant systems engineer for the NASA Socioeconomic Data and Applications Center. Spends another portion of my time teaching a couple intro to GIS and spatial analysis courses for undergrads in sustainable development. So, I see as our pie chart is filling out here that this is much like the group of students that I normally get to talk to that are coming from a lot of different backgrounds. We're going to have to, pull on use cases that are meaningful to people of different types of understandings. And, it's always a challenge. I feel like when I'm teaching, it takes a couple of weeks just to get to know each other a little bit, where you can start to make those adjustments to make things that are most useful for folks. So, my knowledge of data science these days, it's pretty high. What does open science mean? Interesting to see this come through. Bob Chen, who will be speaking today, our former director at Season, he's been an advocate for open science for many years. And now in these past few years, you see that there's a flashlight being shined on it, which is great. But when we have this, understanding based on a career's worth of work, and all of a sudden there's nuances in the definition, like how do we come to some common definition of what it is we're trying to do here? Some of us, we think that like open source, is it gratis? Is it free? Is it Libra? Does it mean freedom? It could mean different things to different folks. What are some natural disasters? This session in particular, we're looking at natural disasters and wildfires. Again, this is another area where we might all have different understandings. So as a geographer, I think about this concept of place and space, right? So space is the quantitative aspect of things, but then place is the qualitative aspect. It's where we come from. It's how we understand things. When you're trying to teach something something new to them, you want to meet them where they are, right? And then build from there. So where I'm from, in a small town in the Catskills, seasonal flooding can be quite an issue. So thanks everyone for weighing in on that. We see there's these different nuances in how people think of open science. This is, the way that the NASA Transform the Open Science mission conceives of it. So, it includes things like the FAIR and CARE principles that are near and dear to many of us. It also expands the idea that open science should be more inclusive, that we should be supporting DI&E and open science and creating new pathways for people to get in the game that maybe historically were underrepresented. In this school project, we're developing curriculum for open science. We've also been trying to walk the walk and practice it along the way. And that's part of the reason why we're having these broad meetings like today. So what is the school project? We're looking at NASA Earth Science applications use cases, and we're using them to demonstrate the data science life cycle. And how are we doing that? We're doing it in interactive notebooks, which, I don't know if it's the flavor of the week. I think maybe it's here to stay. I know there's a lot of notebooks coming online these days, and it's been exponentially expanding. Our focus is on undergraduate and above, so it's a pretty wide focus. I think maybe high school AP fits into that category as well. And we're looking across the number of different themes like water resources, health and air quality, EJ, disasters, wildfires, agriculture, climate. It's a lot of different threads here that I'm trying to tighten. There's some things that are cross-module. So I mentioned that EJ is a thematic area in the Earth Science division, but initially we were thinking we'll have a module on EJ. We went to the American Association of Geographers meeting and we heard very strongly there that EJ is too important to have just one module on. It's cross-cutting across the other themes, but we need to bake it into all the themes. A number of folks on our project team, we work at the NASA CDAC, where we've worked with population data for a long time. So population and infrastructure are other things that we're weaving in and out of the Earth Science themes. In all these cases, we're taking data sets and we're demonstrating data science life cycle. So how do you acquire the data? How do you generate it? What do you want to do to process it and manage it? How do you interpret it once you've done some analysis? And finally, how do you share your results in an open way so that others can stand on the shoulders of giants? The project takes an agile development approach. So we have, these several different modules we're developing, and we're releasing them as they come online. It's been called the waterfall approach, where you build something and then you release it and you're like, oh, well, we weren't thinking of this problem a user found. Now we need to reproduce it all again. In the agile process, where we get feedback early and often, we hope to kind of circumvent some of those problems. We'll see how it plays out. I'm sure we'll still be rebuilding some things later on that we didn't find right away. But, in agile development, we have our consultation team of subject matter experts. We'll be hearing from some of them in the session today about disasters and wildfires. They set the framework for what use cases should we select, how should our lessons be focused. Once the rubber meets the road and we start doing development, we have an open science team. This is largely made up of volunteers, students, and professionals. There are very small stipends that are associated with it. But really what we found is people are really eager to volunteer on this. And what they do is they test out what we're developing. They help course correct. They bring in more diverse perspectives to help frame the project. So today, the workshop's on disasters and wildfires. We've done a couple of these already at other venues. We did a workshop at the NSF iGuide Forum in fall 2023, when we focused on water resources issues. Again, we heard from some subject matter experts. We did some brainstorming. At the AAG back in April, we heard from health and air quality experts. And again, very much the same format. So we've learned some lessons already. One of the biggest lessons is the overhead of open science. Open science isn't free science, right? We need to make sure, as more and more open science is put into project plans, that we're properly budgeting for what it takes actually to get things out early and often and to engage with so many external participants. We've also found an enormous demand for the materials. So our project it's asynchronous online learning modules, but getting emails quite often from people who are like, can we do this in person? Maybe there's a follow on there. Inclusivity is great. When there's too much of it, it can be hard to make decisions. Like, it can lead to too much information. So one thing we've learned to circumvent that is to break off into small teams, focus in small teams, and then we can aggregate information so there's a little bit less information flying at us at once. These projects, they'll all be using a Git backend in conversations this week about where it'll ultimately live. But for now, it's living at our season geospatial. We've had a great partnership with 2I2C, who we've already heard about a few times this week. In the preparation for this session, I opened up the opportunity for folks to get access to our Jupyter Hub. If you haven't emailed me yet, I think only a couple people did. Feel free to email me or Juan Martinez, who's on the slide here, and we'll extend access to you. As we said, we're looking for a big umbrella of feedback. One thing we've been doing as well is that we've been including video tutorials. And so once you get to the Jupyter Hub, you won't be alone. You'll be able to email us, but also you'll be able to walk through a video of exactly how to interact with it. So I'm not going to do much of that today in lieu of hearing from our subject matter experts, but if we have time near the end, we can come back and go through the Jupyter Hub together. I should also say I have a QR code here for anyone who wants to become part of our open science team and provide feedback and get early access to material. Source, the first module that's already out in beta is water resources. The second one is in development still. It's on air quality. This is the basic plan. I'm not going to go into the details, but we're working on some EJ type things at a local scale. Then we're working on social vulnerability and more EJ for health and air quality, especially very relevant at a regional scale. And then looking at again at the global scale. So I look kind of this approach as a geographer of working at multiple scale. So I thought I'd see if ChatGPT could help make an infographic of this for me. It did pretty good. This was after quite a bit of prompting. It's not perfect. This isn't global, but it's pretty good. Some of the early attempts, though, were not so good. That was after a bit of conversation that we got there. So, here we have some global data. and the map is very real. But hey, yeah, how long would it have taken me to draw this? Right? Like, this was about 10 minutes of conversation to get to something that I thought was acceptable. Not perfect, but acceptable. So we're actively thinking about how AI can improve our processes. But we're here today to talk about wildfires and disasters. We have done some pre-planning and have some initial ideas on some things we could do, but very much open to being redirected here. I think the disaster life cycle will be prominent in whichever path we go. We've thought about looking at thermal data at varying scales. So we had the opportunity at AAG to meet with the Pacific Disaster Center and to do a little bit of field work and collect some drone-based thermal data. So we could do some, again, local, regional, global, making connections with the different types of thermal data. Damage assessment, it's an image we collected while we were in Maui of a washed out road and flash floods. So it's near and dear to my heart. I think that drone data is democratizing access to data. So it'd be nice to get some students involved from that angle as well. As you can see, there's a lot of threads here, right? Like there's the disasters life cycle. There's this open science diagram, which there are many prongs. There's also the data science life cycle, moving through a workflow. So how do we put all these things together in a way that's coherent and useful for folks? It's a work in progress. Just a shout out to everyone who's been funded to work on this team. Groups at Columbia University, and Tom, who's my co-convener at iSciences, and then Deborah Volk, who's the PI at the Institute for Demographic Research at Community Ruth College. But with that, I've taken too much time already. I want to hand it over to our disasters and wildfires subject matter experts. And, it's a real pleasure to be inviting Bob Chen up to kick us off. Let me bring your slides up. Hey, actually, I was on time. Yes. Yeah. Retirement just for us. Thank you.
That's good. No, it's nice to be back and actually have a chance to talk and not just listen to this whole meeting. So glad to be here and maybe just give a little context. I think that's my role in this. I haven't been an active contributor to that project, but based on a lot of the data and other research projects at Season, we have been working in this area. And of course, as part of I've been part of the ESIC disasters life cycle cluster for many years, and several of the presenters here are from that group. So it's kind of, I think, a good opportunity to merge cluster activities, get the disaster cluster involved in this educational effort. It's the director emeritus, we chose that as versus alumni director. Yeah, right. So some of this is really basic for you, but it's just sort of to get out that, you know, if you're talking about a subject area, you want to bring in the conceptual frameworks in that application area, and not just kind of say, hey, here's the data, take it. And we need to do the work, I think, to fit the data to what the overall framework and what the specific needs are. So the two that I'm going to talk about, Kit already mentioned the disaster life cycle, and I'll get back to that in a minute. But the one I'm worked a lot, of course, is this concept of disaster risk, which, you know, I'm sure you're aware has the more or less normally the earth science or environmental component, the hazard, the probability something bad will happen. Of course, it could be human induced, not just natural. Exposure, you know, if it happens in the middle of Siberia, it's different when it happens in Manhattan or Asheville. And then the vulnerability of you can be exposed, but if you're in a soundly constructed building, it makes a big difference if you're versus being outside in a tent or a mobile home. So, you know, again, this is all pretty basic, but I think what students certainly need to appreciate is you can think about these hazards and the exposure and the vulnerability in broad terms, but what matters is what's the combination at any particular point in space and time. And you know, we think of hazards normally affecting a very specific area in the short term. Obviously, over the course of the disaster life cycle and all the secondary impacts, you can affect a much larger area. So, you know, you have to understand those scale and locational issues. And, you know, even though most people get trained in, you know, seismology or hydrology or atmospheric science, and they tend to look at hazards individually, we're obviously living in a world where there are a lot of hazards. They can overlap in interesting ways. There can be interactions, not just in the hazard side, but in the exposure and the vulnerability of, you know, things like storms making the soils wet and causing disruption to the soil, and wildfires having an effect on that and the susceptibility to rainfall. All these things that we're starting to see are much more interconnected than people traditionally assumed. So in my hat as a director of this data center, you know, we certainly, as a data center, but many around, worked on different kinds of hazard data. You know, we've seen a lot of examples, I think, in earlier sessions of all the different kinds of both natural and human-induced hazards. I won't go into this in detail. Exposure, of course, is not just is often oversimplified, but there's a lot of complexity. Yeah, you're concerned about whether people are there. Of course, do they live there? Are they working there? Are they visiting? Are they in transit? Are they outdoor workers, indoor workers, all sorts of different exposure dimensions. And then, of course, all the environmental and other resources. And of course, importantly, all the infrastructure we have built or not built, or maintained and not maintained. But clearly a whole lot of data that actually, in many cases, is much harder to access in a high resolution updated form. I mean, much of the data of infrastructure is either considered sensitive from a security viewpoint or commercially developed and not open access. But, if you think about the regional impacts of disasters, actually having an understanding of critical infrastructure and other things is very important. And so, of course, we do have a lot of exposure data at CDAC. And of course, one of the little side things is it's not like there's one data set, right? There's, in most of these cases, multiple sources, and the science community loves developing new data sets based on new methods, and they're not necessarily initially worried about, they're always competing now. Well, we've got the best, the highest resolution, the most current, the most detailed, whatever. But the outside world looks at it and gets confused when there are many different data sets with lots of pros and cons and issues which are unavoidable. And so part of the issue is how do you help users decide on the best data set for their purpose and make adjustments or methods to accommodate for the different sources of data and underlying methods. So again, I'm not going to go into detail. Now, vulnerability is getting even further, and of course, crossing into the population data is in the social science side, but really to start to understand the socio-cultural aspects of disaster vulnerability. Obviously, different categories of people, different capabilities, and in some cases, historical injustices that people have been talking about a lot more recently. And similarly, the resources that may be exposed can have different conditions, as would the infrastructure. The effects of any specific event is going to be potentially quite different condition on both the ways in which the people in infrastructure are maintained. I didn't put it in, but some of the conceptualizations of risk include capacity as a separate factor, and they kind of overlap depending on what source of information you're looking at. And we do also, there's a lot of sort of indicator level composite indicators to try to get at the concept of vulnerability, but this is a still rapidly evolving area. So thinking about the disaster life cycle that Kit showed briefly, the risk assessment framework I just showed tends to be used sort of in the preparedness field of trying to look across in advance to kind of identify risks and compare them. Not always, but if you think about the disaster, not just addressing disaster risks, but getting involved in response and prevention and planning ahead, you have to think about both the ways in which people prepare, affect the ways in which the hazards they think are coming are going to affect them. When events happen, you have to be prepared and to respond. But then there's a phase in the community, the emergency management community and others, where you talk about recovery. And of course, there are lessons that sometimes, like the mortality during the recovery period can be higher than the initial impact of disasters if the disease spreads and that sort of thing. So certainly there are important lessons there. And then, of course, mitigation, because hazards repeat and they come in sequence and affects future mitigation. And just to emphasize that point, we have done a lot of work on multi-hazard issues. And in the past, I always like this example because way back when these islands were traded for Manhattan. There's actually this account of the island being hit by an earthquake, a tidal wave, a volcano, and a hurricane on the same day. So that might be stretching it, but although actually there's some potentially geophysical reasons why, and these things could be related. And there's certainly the case in like the Tokyo earthquake and tsunami where the fires were fanned by a hurricane. So, we can't take the idea that these are independent hazards. I mean, that's getting passé because we have climate change, and we know that climate change may affect the underlying probabilities and distribution in a way that, is not reflected in the historical data. This is another cartoon. Just to kind of wrap up quickly, I mean, to make the point that having these data available is obviously an important step to crossing those boundaries so that a decision maker who's faced, well, do I invest in earthquaking proof or flood proofing, or what if my what if my dams are not earthquake proof enough and I didn't take that into account in making an investment? They need this information in a more open, transparent, comparable way. And how do you present all those different layers and put them together is, I think, a really important both research and practical issue that hopefully this module will get people excited about. The openness lets you play around and do all the, we were in the integration session here earlier today, and all the different ways and challenges that people have putting even similar data together are an order of magnitude worse when you're talking about some of these kinds of sources, and enabling users to have a better handle on how to do it and to collaborate with some level of trust. And this is my final graphic, is to give a shout out to Dave, because that's something we worked with him on, is what's the decision framework that's needed, and how can the data support those kinds of integrated efforts. Dave's pointing at our population query service showing up in his interface, and I'll be talking more about that. And you're wearing the same shirt. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Bob. So we'll hold questions for anyone to the end. Our next speaker is Maggie Glasgow. She's from the University of Alabama at Huntsville and spent many years working with the NEST disasters program. So Maggie, take it away and let me know, and I'll advance your slides.
Sure. Thank you, Kit. Appreciate the invitation to speak to you all today. So my project has been a multi-disciplinary, multi-team effort to bring global flood alerting to the world through Pacific Disaster Center, who Kit mentioned before. And it's integrating both hydrological modeling with remote sensing data to come up with flood severity alerts, as well as flood extent, depth, and damage assessment. So this is actually a big project. I couldn't list everybody on the slide and still fit everything. So for each individual portion of it, I'll let you know who the investigators are. So next slide, please. Oh, yeah. So what we're creating here are global flood maps, and those maps are a product of an ensemble model that we created called Model of Models. So this takes in 2 or 3 hydrologic models and incorporates information from remote sensing to help bound the areas that are most likely to affect populations. So we have a result from Model of Models that gives us a severity alert within a watershed basin, and then we use the remote sensing to try to hone in on where the actual areas that are affected would create issues for populations or infrastructure. So what this is part of is a flood risk and early warning product that is being implemented in the PDC's disaster-aware multi-hazard decision-making platform. So here's another example of how we can use different data sets, different products to come up with a sort of global view of hazards. PDC delivers, I believe, 18 different hazard types. And so floods is one of them, but we have earthquakes, hurricanes, landslides, tsunami, that sort of stuff. So you really do get a picture of what multi-hazard looks like across the globe and how there might be these cascading effects that Bob mentioned as well. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we are partnering with the Pacific Disaster Center, and our products are being served out of their disaster-aware platform. So at the moment, they are incorporating the model of model output and creating these flood incidents. And so what you can do is you go in and see something like the image on the bottom left there, where you have the global view of the severity in different watersheds, and different events show up as specific points that you can drill down on. You click on it, and then you can get more information for each subsequent layer of information that you're interested in. So if the image to the top right there is sort of when you click on that point, which is the flood hazard, you kind of get this overall map that gives you information about the areas that are being affected. And the alerts are ranked in National Weather Service categories, where it's watch and warning, and then just an informational thing where it's not as severe. So what we're actually very interested in is the red portion, which is a warning, and then less so with the watches and advisories, which are in orange and yellow. If you click on this incident here, you'll get what's called a hazard brief. And this is an integrated report that shows the severity within that area that is being affected by that flood incident. And then it also gives you on the right there, on the two insets, it gives you precipitation information, as well as some infrastructure risk and exposure. So it kind of gives you an overall kind of look at what this flood incident is affecting, and also has information that you can click on, and it'll give you a report. So next slide. Oh, and just to mention, with disasterware, it is freely available for disaster decision makers and folks in the .edu realm. They do have a free platform that is in the form of a mobile platform. So you can download that on your Android or Apple iOS, and the disaster alert, which is this mobile platform, gives you a slightly less informative information there, but it does give you the areas that are predicted to have specific severities. So DisasterWare is the full decision-making platform, and that's freely available to, like I said, disaster management in the .edu realm. So you can get the simplified version in Disaster Alert, or get into the full web interface with DisasterWare. So just kind of going into a little bit more detail about how the flood early warning is created through the model of models, and I'm listing the folks that are on the MOM team. We use a number of sources to come up with the severity alert, so it is an ensemble approach to coming up with an overall severity. So we use the Global Watershed Risk Index that is published by the World Resources Institute, and that defines the basins and watersheds that we're providing the alerts for. So in some cases, it's actually very large areas. So that's why we're using the remote sensing to drill down on where specifically we think the risk affects populations. So there's two hydrological models, GFMS, which is out of the University of Maryland, and GLOFAST, which is an EU product. And then we used three remote sensing data sets to help kind of identify where the flood extent and depth is. And so one is the HWRF, which is much more of a storm related model, because when we first put this together, it was much more riverine, long-term flooding. And so we knew that we needed to include sort of the short-term flooding incidents that were storm related. So we included that. That's from the National Weather Service. And then the Dartmouth Flood Observatory creates data sets based on MODIS. And so that is another way that we kind of capture through remote sensing where the flood extent is. And then we also use information from VIIRS, the VIIRS satellite, and that so what we do is we combine all of these data sets to come up with what we through a weighting system would come up with the best severity alert. So if we're missing some data from one of the data sets, then the other data set that actually has the information is more heavily weighted. So on the right here, we see the differentiation between the different watershed basins. I believe that right now the severities are posted at level 6. So that's still pretty broad. And so PDC does have the ability to drill down to level 7 and 8 watershed basins. And so that actually gives you a clearer sort of area that is being affected. Next slide, please. So as I was describing before on those slides, this is just with bigger images there. We have several key elements that come out of this global flood situational awareness product. So we're able to create a severity alert, which tells you how severe the flood is, derived from this MOM and global data sets. And again, it's in the advisory watch warning. And what we're really interested in is that red area, which is a warning. It gives you so PDC's product gives you exposure data. And so that's formed from the aggregated watershed that is affected by that severity alert. And then the third thing is when you do click on this product, it comes up with a description that tells you in more detail what you're looking at. So next slide, please. And all of this is freely available through our GitHub repository. So if you're not interested in the actual interface that PDC provides and you want to take this and bring it into your own GIS system, the repository can be found on our GitHub. And it stores only the last 12 days, but there is the ability if we get an email to look at other events. And so you get GeoJSON figures as well, or images, as well as a CSV where you can where it tells you what the watershed delineations are and then the severity alerts. So if you're interested, you can take a look at that. And on the right, that's just an example of the floods from 2021 in India. Next slide, please. So just an example of what you would be able to generate out of the GitHub repository, which is showing some results from the California atmospheric river flooding earlier this year. And so it generates a map that shows which watershed basins have contributed to the severity alert. You can do, it has an animation of the different watersheds that are affected over time within the watch and warning. And then there's a distribution of where over time you have the different levels of severity alert. And so there's some specific events listed down there in the GitHub output. We have this California event. We had some flooding in Louisiana earlier this year, and then the Pakistan flooding from last year. So next slide, please. So I mentioned that we're using remote sensing data to help derive the flood extent. So right now we're using more optical, but we have a team that's working on using SAR techniques or synthetic aperture radar in order to delineate flood extent and depth. And so that team is Franz Meyer from University of Alaska Fairbanks, Christy Tiampo at University of Colorado Boulder, and then Alex Melson at University of Alabama in Huntsville. And so there's two different techniques here, and both of them are derived from SAR data. And Christie's technique is higher resolution, is down at the 10 meter resolution, and Franz's at the 10 meter and then 30 meter for Franz. And so we did a study where we were trying to see which was more accurate. It ends up both are pretty accurate at the different resolutions, and one of the thresholding techniques got more false positives and the other one more false negatives. And so combining those two outputs helps us, again, in an ensemble way, figure out what the flood extent and depth are from actual observational data. One thing that's kind of hard with SAR in particular is that the repeat time isn't necessarily short enough that you're going to see the short-term flooding, but if it's a longer event, you'll be able to usually get data to take a look at that. Okay, next slide, please. And the last part of the project that I'll mention is using optical data to do sort of damage assessment. And so this is the effort led by Zhizhong Chen over at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And he's developed a technique using AI to help to determine the footprints of where you have flood affected areas. He's using a data set available from Microsoft to get the infrastructure and buildings that are affected. And so they use this technique using this data and are able to figure out where infrastructure is potentially being affected and what the damage level is. And so he's created a gateway for this. And I'll just note, Kit, you mentioned drone data. Chen does use drones in some of his damage assessment stuff as well. Next slide, please. So just taking a look at what you can glean from this, this AI-based damage assessment. They're using data from Sentinel-2, so optical data, and they have the building footprints. And so you can see here where he would predict the level of damage to that infrastructure based on the identification of areas that are affected using the optical data. And next slide. Yes, that is my last slide. Thank you so much for having the opportunity to speak to you. And I believe Kit said we'll hold questions till the end. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Maggie.
Mm-hmm.
I should say, I forgot we have Slido. So if you have questions, put them in the Slido and then we can keep track of them at the end. Our next speaker is Xiang Huang from the East Tennessee State University. And we'll hear some more about wildfires and how they affect.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, I am Qian Huang. I'm a research assistant professor at East Tennessee State University Center for Rural Health Research. So it's a College of Public Health. I was an ESIP fellow working with Dave. And Maggie talked about remote sensing and flooding. I'm going to talk about a little bit about like remote sensing, wildfire, air quality, and linked with public health. So this is an example to show how can we use the remote sensing data to link with wildfire smoke and to assess some public health issues. And I used COVID-19 as an example. And this project was founded by ESIP Funding Friday 2 years ago. A little bit background. So wildfire can cause initial mobility and mortalities, and it also can cause some mental health problems because people may experience trauma after experiencing the wildfire event. And it also can increase the crude rate of childhood asthma and over 4.2 million premature deaths per year from lung cancer, cardiovascular disease, COPD, chronic respiratory problems, etc., and also can decreases the body ability to fend off pathogens. And air quality could definitely, some researchers show it could increase the hospitalization rate and the fatality rate of COVID-19. And the air quality index has been used to measure wildfire smoke. Right, so we have an air quality chart here. If it's 0 to 50, it's green, it's good. If it's 100 to 150, could be unhealthy for sensitive groups. If 200 is very unhealthy and then could be hazardous. However, the smoke location and affected area, it's very hard to be captured by AQI, because AQI is like get or assessed in some weather station. I know Dave and Bob probably have a better sense about where the station are located and how, yeah, thank you. Yes, so it's very hard to capture the smoke location. And like Maggie, this study area is also in California, and where it has been famously known for the natural hazard of wildfire and air pollution. And this is just for 2020, and there were over around 10,000 incidents and burned over 4.2 million acres. And caused 33 fatalities, over 10,000 structures got damaged or destroyed, especially the August complex fire. A fire began in August of 2020 and due to a strike and became a largest wildfire in California history and burned over 1 million acres. And during the same time, 2020, COVID-19 caused over 2 million cases, infected over 2 million cases, and caused over 33,000 fatalities because of COVID. So the study is used as a remote sensing data to assess the August complex fire smoke affected area and to see what the impacts on COVID-19 outcomes, including the incidence rate, fatality rate, and testing rate in California. And 3 sub-questions. What's the spatial distribution of fire smoke that's needed to be assessed by remote sensing data? And what's the relationship between smoke density and AQI? Because I try to link the smoke with AQI to see whether AQI is a good can represent the smoke density well, and also what's the relationship between those 3 variables like smoke density, AQI, and COVID-19 outcomes, including the incidence, fatality, and test. And time frame for this study, just to show a very short example, is 16 days from August 16 to August 31st to 2020. And those are data and methodologies. You will see the AQI is from EPA, smoke data is from NOAA Office of Cell Light and Product Operation, has a mapping system for smoke product. So I've looked through a lot of different remote sensing resources, and this data show, I will show you a example later, but this one already turned to a vector file. So you don't need to convert the raster remote sensing file to vector, and it's easy to use for this type of analysis. And then it has daily count data on COVID-19 cases, mortalities, and population. Those are from California Health and the Human Services Agency. And the testing data from tracking project. And the statistic analysis, including it's like how to combine those data together. One is remote sensing data. They all have different geographic unit, they have different temporal unit, and how to merge them together. So the way is I assigned the highest value of smoke density to each county. And public health data is very hard to collect at a very granular level. The most frequent data we can get is at the county level. It is public health related. And if for COVID, it's more like before, it's like keep updated. It's updated every day. So that's easier to track. But for other things, like some chronic conditions, COPD, the fatality data will have at least a 2-year lag. So it's very hard to do public health research and link with the Earth data. Yeah, this is some like limitation of the public health data research and the Earth data. And then I also use the Spearman correlation analysis to assess the relationship between those 3 variables. So here is some preliminary result, and this one shows COVID-19 daily new cases, new death, new test, and average AQI. So, and this the part are the start is when August complex started. It has a big fire event, and you will see the new cases and fatalities. It's varied a lot, and the test definitely varied a lot because sometimes they do not report their results and in weekends. So you will also see, okay, weekdays they have a lot, especially on Monday they have the highest peak, but during the weekend they have 0 information about the testing. And then the average AQI, we'll see that the August complex one, it has insignificant high than other time, and then it has go like, yeah, it has a huge range during that time period. And this is the remote sensing data, remote sensing file. It's a daily one from August 16 to August 31st. And the green represents the light smoke, yellow represents medium, and red represents heavy. So you can see the daily changes across the area and the days. You'll see like the beginning, most of them are light, but then when it's like August 20, around that time, you'll see this area is like covered by very heavy smoke. And those are some analysis about the smoke density and AQI as well as the COVID-19 result. Also, density was positively related to AQI, and which like we could align the AQI with smoke density data. And however, the smoke density was negatively related to COVID-19 fatalities, which is very interesting. But because COVID-19 fatalities always have several days delay, could be 4 to 6 weeks delay due to fatality, because when you get affected by COVID-19 and then you go to hospital for like 2 to 4 weeks, and the fatality usually happens after 4 to 6 weeks. And so that could explain why it's negatively related. So like more like long time period need to be included. Also, the temporal delay need to be considered. And AQI was possibly significantly correlated with COVID-19 case and death and testing rate. So we can say, okay, when AQI like increasing could exaggerate the impact of COVID-19. A little bit conclusion. So the smoke could exaggerate the impact of public health issues. And as a public health person, researcher, they will love they would love to hear about what's the policy implications, like how to link the research with policy promotion, right? So we, as researchers, we always use the data, do fancy reports, do fancy research, but what's the policy implications? So a little bit for that, it's like related. It could we talk about the disaster life cycle. Yeah, so it could implement more mitigation actions and do like prepare more for the next pandemic. So this is about COVID-19, but what about like others? Some chronic conditions, it could be other outbreaks for respiratory disease, right? And this study has some limitations, as some correlation, its weight and geographic units is kind of large because of the COVID-19 public health related data. And we also need a more wildfire pollutant measurement, like PM2.5 or other related pollutants. And future study will cover the entire period and also considers the time lag for the COVID-19 impact. And for other disease, it's kind of the same thing. We could use the hospital utilization data. We could use like fatality data. It's always have like month delays or even, and the data could be delayed here. And this serves as an example of how to use remote sensing data and link with air quality and public health. And in the future, AI could definitely join in and see contribute more in those type of research and assess the impact of the environment on public health and human health. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Last but not least amongst our subject matter experts is the CEO of Storm Center Communications, Dave Jones. So Dave, let's bring this all together.
My talk will be short. Thank you very much. I'm the co-chair of the ESIP wildfire cluster and also the ESIP disaster life cycle cluster. And we have been working for the past couple of years on ways to identify and access trusted data. Data that non-technical decision makers can access and use in their decision-making processes. But they don't know what we know in ESIP. They're non-technical, but they want to use technical data to make decisions. And so we have an initiative going within the two clusters called the Trusted Data Now Initiative. And why are we doing this? Well, communities need trusted data. They don't know how to access data. They'll typically Google something and come up with a who knows what that they could use in their decision making, which could be a poor guidance product. Agencies like federal and state agencies collect quality control and archive data and make that data available. But it's at various levels that data is made available. It's very pleasing currently to science users, researchers, things like that. But when you talk about regular people using data, it's very tough. And private organizations are collecting data for their own apps, and they're making that data available and even sharing it, but there's license agreements associated with that. There are challenges to sharing data across various platforms. And working with the data is fairly limited to data scientists, to technology experts, and to tech-savvy users. And we see a lot of that here at ESIP. There's a lot of feedback on evolving systems and evolving data and formats and things like that. It's great. We love it. But it doesn't benefit so much the non-technical decision makers out there. Eventually, and agency goals are to make data available to the public, but progress is very slow. While these extreme events are increasing, right? We're seeing more and more things happening because of accelerated climate change. Temperatures are just going way up. If you remember the plenary session with Deke from NCEI, he had that graph, and the 23 and 2024 temperatures were off the charts. That's the way that we're headed. So there's a sense of urgency for making data available and making data trusted. And data that's made available is hard to understand and use. And so the way we look at this within the clusters is that open science shouldn't stop at available, right? It's available, that's great, but what else? I remember talking with the administrator of NOAA, Dr. Rick Spinrad, at one point, and just making data available is not the goal. It's making the data usable and beneficial for decision makers and users. Even FEMA has they have 14 potential points of inequity in the disaster cycle. So this is from and this PowerPoint presentation will be available. It's the FEMA Office of Disability Integration and Coordination. I just highlighted the first three: inclusive planning, alerts and warnings. Not everybody gets these. Information, culturally informed, actionable, available immediately. These are all challenges. There's a bunch of other points here with FEMA, and FEMA is an agency that tries to, they work where the rubber meets the road in trying to provide assistance and recovery from disasters. And so here's an example of what we talk about within the disaster lifecycle cluster and the wildfire cluster, and that is a world in which we can have data available at our fingertips that are easy to understand. This particular one are showing watches, warnings, and advisories from the National Weather Service, but then also drawing a hand polygon around certain areas. And then what Bob showed earlier, that immediate query to the CDAC, Socioeconomic Data and Application Center, and then pulling in real time out the population under this green polygon that you've hand drawn. So it's a way in which you can make data services immediately available from a hugely trusted archive of data and bring that in. So this is just really, this was a concept, proof of concept that we put together with CDAC. But when we showed it to other people and other agencies, this capability, they're like, what else can you do with that? Can you show us other populations that don't have transportation? Can you show us populations in certain, age ranges? And the answer is yes. You just have to build those services and make that data available. But it's simple. And it's a way in which people can start to say, wow, well, I know you were talking about census data here and weather service data there, but I don't know where to get all that stuff. And when you can pull it into one collaborative environment, it's really, really good. This is not meant for you to read. It's just meant to show you that that web services are improving from the National Weather Service. They are now have cloud GIS web services where they're migrating their operational data services to the cloud. And they're, REST services, WMS, you can see all the options there. And these are updated in real time. So when they're displayed in a GIS map, and the National Hurricane Center issues that 5 p.m. forecast and advisory, and they hit that button, boom, it updates in the web service and therefore in your mapping applications, which is really good. They're expanding these services too. And the private sector, I've worked occasionally with this group here, HSR Health. They're putting analytics to work and creating various indexes, hurricane risk index for vulnerability and income and health and all that sort of stuff. So who are the most vulnerable? And these data layers and services are things that they put together using their AI algorithms. So the services are popping up, and that's great. And this our goal for the initiative is really to identify trusted data that's open and available or soon to be available, to assist decision makers and the public. Could be observations, could be alerts, decision support products, rapid response deployments, model output, trusted AI, or historical comparative data. You know, we're in Asheville. This is the universal center of climate archiving. So it would be really nice in the future to have those large language models available by saying, hey, when was the last time that BWI, Baltimore Washington International Airport, experienced 4 days of 101 degrees or higher? And it'll come back and give us a big goose egg, but it happened last week. So the first time ever, we had 4 days straight above 101 degrees. So we're getting close to that. But this quote from Phil Balin, he works with FEMA on the West Coast and also the California National Guard. This quote has really stuck with me after he gave it in one of our monthly meetings. It says, we have no way of seeing what data is available or being collected in disaster areas. We have to open doors to open science and not force people to be in the know on where to get data. He was basically saying, we have an earthquake, we have a flood, we don't know what data is being collected by the Civil Air Patrol. We don't know what data is being collected and what satellites are approaching. Now, individually, somebody's going to say, yeah, I know, I can tell you where those satellites are. Yes, you're in the know. But what about the people in the operations centers who have no idea? So, you know, we've got to bring data to the fore and make it proactive so people can get access to it. And so this isn't official, but we're, you know, toying with this ESIP cluster testbed activity where we can take data sets, put them into geospatial environments, and then put them in front of decision makers and say, hey, this is valuable. Get that feedback, give it back to the ESIP partners and other organizations that are providing it so we can give them feedback. Testing it for their accessibility, timeliness, trustworthiness, ability to be easily understood by especially non-technical experts. And the little graphic on the lower right shows an example, and the Weather Service is getting there. They're getting there, where you can see in the yellow, that's an area of expected high precipitation over the next 1 to 3 days. And the button that when you click on it, you get this stuff. Which basically means nothing to anybody. You know, if you work with it all the time, you know what it might mean. But if you're somebody who is trying to make a decision, you know, this means nothing. FD0. Oh my gosh. You know, tell me in English what it means and how people can use that data. And so we're getting very close. The data is available. We're able to click on it, but we're just not yet able to describe what it is and what it does. So I had a little fun with AI myself. I didn't use ChatGPT, but I used the Microsoft, whatever it's called, that you can type in and have a little conversation with. Our initiative, this is really a vision for the initiative to have data layers easily accessed, timely, interoperable through REST services, easily understood, easily communicated, and trusted. So easy a child could do it. And I think we're headed in that direction. I think it's very promising. All of the stuff here is mostly over my head, but I come at it from a user perspective, and I know what users want. And we can then work in that interface to in between to help deliver that timely data and information. So I just want to give you quick reminders, and this is not for all this stuff here, but the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster meets once a month on the first Thursday of every month. Next meeting is August 1st, and it's at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Everyone is free to join the cluster meeting. We talk about all sorts of stuff. You can join the disasters email list. You can see all the notes from all the disasters meetings that we've had. If you're sleepy or not sleepy and you want to sleep, there's some good nuggets in there. Also, the wildfire cluster meets once a month, the second Thursday of every month. August 8th is the next meeting, and it's at 4 o'clock. It's a Zoom, and we discuss all sorts of stuff related to wildfires as well. And then the last one here, the air quality cluster. Steve Young is co-chair with Beth Huffer. They meet the fourth Thursday of every month. August 22nd is their next meeting. So these are all good conversations. If you have questions in this project that you're coming up with and you want to ask somebody, those are good times to join in and join those cluster calls and just say, hey, we're working on this. We have a question. Can you answer it? We'd be happy to. It's like just an hour at a time that we carve out so we can talk about specific data needs and things like that. So I think, oh, I'm sorry, and the data stewardship cluster. That is Alicia Wood Charlson. They meet the second Monday of the month from August 12th is the next meeting, and they meet at 12 o'clock Eastern time. So lots of clusters within ESIP, but these might be very relevant to ones that you're working with. And that's it for me. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dave. So, as you can see, there's even amongst all of these different themes, all of these life cycles, even just within disasters, there's so many different prongs. So, we really could use your help to narrow down where to focus our efforts. I'd like to give Tom a chance if he wants to come up and say a few words about summarizing what we've done. Then we'll open up the Slido and open up to discussion, which I know we're all eagerly waiting for. Yeah, I guess I should say to bring this home to how this all comes together. Our lessons, as I mentioned earlier, we have a partnership with 2I2C for this online Jupyter Hub. A couple folks have emailed me for access. If anyone's interested, they can email me and get access to this as well. This is our module on water resources, and in these environments, you can go in and make modifications to look at different dates or to look, at different geographic locations, which will be some of the active learning things that we encourage across the modules. Bring my slide back up here, but Tom. So we have a I know we have and the ultimate. So we want to think of this concept like quality. Help us figure out how to take this issue set of the battery and create a curriculum. And we're talking about three modules. Think of it as like
Thank you. Think of it as the first three, lectures or weeks of a course on disasters and wildfires and data science. And so what are the issues that we want to tackle? This is not a PhD program. This is an introductory level thing. What are the core data sets that we want people to become familiar with and be able to manipulate? And what kinds of literacy are we trying to achieve? So yes, we can highlight core data sets, but what we really want people to be able to do is to go out and take what they learn, find purpose-suited data for what they're trying to accomplish as they go forward in their active learning life. And conceptually, we've covered some of them, but conceptually, what are the the key concepts about disasters and wildfires. So, it's a multi-objective curriculum with data science, disasters and wildfires, and data literacy. And so that's what we're trying to get across today. And my preference, since we do have students in the room, given that you've heard all of this, is what resonates with you, and then we can sort of engage more broadly. Does that make sense to you, Kit?
Okay. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So, we do have this set of questions up on Slido, as Tom mentioned, about data sets and themes and how can we improve open science and disaster literacy. Like I say, narrowing down the focus is really where we could use your help. So everyone, please go ahead and take a shot at the Slido. While we're doing that, I know there are a couple of questions that came across online in the Q&A. So since we're short on time, I hope we can multitask a little and fill out our Slido and also answer questions. We'll leave it live for, Yeah, absolutely. So the question from the audience is, how long will the Slido be live? And we'll leave it open. Sure. So the question from the audience is, what's the time frame for development? So we've just started year 2 of a 2-year project. We have the water resources module that is in beta now, and then we'll be working on 3 modules over the next year. So it's quite rapid. So for disasters and wildfires, within the next 8 months, we should have something to beta. So Dr. Huang, there is a question in the Slido for you. The question is, what are some ways in which the data lag in health data can be reconciled with Earth observations?
That's a great question again. So public health data, it's hard to get at the real time, especially for some like substance use or chronic conditions, those kind of things. But we could use, and another thing is we need to protect patient privacy. And that's another issue. So I created some dashboard for aging population or for maternal and child health. And even it's at the county level, sometimes over half of the county data are missing. Yeah, so it's not just for time lag, but also the missing data, especially for rural areas where the population sample size is small. So they will they will just not release the data if the count maybe at a certain level, maybe less than 11 or those type of criteria to do that. So one thing we could do is always, if it's survey data, increases the sample size of the rural area. And if there's a time lag, we can try to use some different data source. Instead of using fatality data, we could use hospital utilization data. This could be one way, but it will not really solve the problem. So one thing we always like to talk about is for encourage the data providers to like collect more comprehensive data and provide it in a like more immediate level, like more short time lag. But this one need a lot of effort from different people and organizations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to be clear, for pedagogical purposes, I'm not sure we need real-time applications. So we can do retrospective analysis to get the concepts across and not have to worry about that real-time data availability.
That's actually That's actually a really good point. So right now we're trying to develop a system that uses the retro data to align with the environment data, so public health, and align with the retro data, public health data, to either provide some specific health suggestions, because we can do some modeling for if it's like modeling for air pollution or modeling for some environmental data using AI, right? And then using the retro public health data and to link with that and provide the specific public health recommendations during like as a similar circumstances. Circumstances. That's a great point. Thank you.
Are there any other questions in the room, either for any of our speakers or, about the curriculum development in general?
Tom, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm LJ Palmer Maloney. I am here with a few hats on. I'm at East Carolina University, so down on the coast, not here in the mountains. And I brought some students to the meeting today who are also, from a class on environmental impact analysis. We are looking at ways that the environment impacts people in kind of a flip of what's traditionally people impacting the environment kind of a way. One of the things that crossed my mind though, Dave, when you were talking was understanding users. Because all the time in this world, we're dealing with non-technical people who want to use the information to try to do anything with it. But they don't even know they need to be users. Okay, and that to me is the more fundamental question. How do we even broaden the umbrella to go, you need this? Because geography has always had a struggle with that, how to bring our audience to it. But the other thing that really I know we're dealing with on the coast all the time is trying to deal with the new normal and to quit calling it risk, because it's just the way life is right now. So you don't need this for that one time when we're looking for the hurricane that's coming or for the compound flooding event. You just need to know day to day today what's going on, and to encourage that use more in a broad spectrum kind of way. And I'm just wondering if that's anything that y'all are reaching to, or if we need to keep pulling it in to be having the conversation about risk to get the attention.
Yeah, that's a great question, and there were a couple questions in there, and let me address your last one first. We are seeing more extreme events, and we're seeing them more frequently, and so the more we can get people to understand that data is available that can heighten their awareness for what impacts might be happening, whether it's a flooded road and they can't get out of their neighborhoods, or the river is rising and it's going to flood the whole town. All too often we wait to hear on the news what are we expected to do, and then they say, oh, evacuate area A. Where's that? And I'm not really familiar with that. So there is a broader way that we can let people know that there is data out there. There is trusted data out there. There's information. We had it today. A lot of misinformation out there. We did a live shot with the Weather Channel early this morning on the explosion in Yellowstone. you know, that people were saying on the internet, oh, it's the big volcanoes coming, you know, it's on the way. And no, it was, you know, it was a high pressure and high temperature water that, you know, got trapped and then exploded. But and you know, I'll put in a shameless plug. We have a book coming out in the end in October of this year to address misinformation and disinformation related to the oceans and the atmosphere and climate change. Yeah, yeah. And so the more we can let people know that there is data out there, and we work with broadcast meteorologists around the country, we try to give them the message and information that, yes, this is information you could understand and you can access as well. But right now, there are enhanced risks, and there are enhanced risks where everybody lives. You just need to understand what they are. Right? I think the quote today was from our speaker at lunch was we're getting a whole bunch of climate migrants from Florida coming into North Carolina, and they're building houses on our hills. You know, exactly, exactly. So there are ways that we can let people know.
Thanks. You know, one thing that resonated with me about what you said came up as well in our air quality module is that, you know, we're working with these students in the South Bronx, and they go out and they study the air quality and they see that it's not so great in the South Bronx. So, you know, how are we communicating about this stuff? If something is normal, but we're calling it risk and we're raising the alarm, that's having an impact on those young ears as well. So we need to be very careful about it. Are there any other questions or comments from the room?
I want to push these questions about users back onto the pedagogy. So what can we do in 3 modules that would excite people and develop at least some literacy about the nature of the data that are available, even if it's not on a real-time system, but you know, what are the key messages we get for these 3 modules that are going to make a difference as people go forward?
Thank you, Tom. There's a lot to unpack here. My background's education. One of the things that I would recommend is that we take a deep dive into these unbound reports that NASA has funded. There's one on environmental justice. There's one on coastal processes. There's one on tribal food, energy, and water. And what the Unbound program does is it pulls together communities of practice that are focused around different topics or types of users, and they put our data in front of them and say, here, go use this to solve your problems. And then they report out on what the pain points or opportunities are. And so Kit and I've talked about Unbound, but that's where I would start. And let's look and see where the convergences are. Let's start a matrix and see what's the low-hanging fruit, what's, you know, pie in the sky. Let's start there and see what can we do, and what are the needs and where do they get tripped up, and let's start there. And just like Kit mentioned, you know, with that agile piece, test early, test often, let's fail early, let's fail visibly, and let's get feedback from people and use our community of practice to get that feedback.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. So there's a lot of great answers here. I know we're reaching the end of the session. So the last thing I want to do is to invite people to stay involved with the project. So yet another QR code. I'm sorry about that. But if you want to get involved with our project, there are a number of ways, either from joining the Open Science team which will get you added to at least an email list where you can stay on top of what we're doing. You know, if you're able to contribute more as part of your own work, we're looking for those synergies always. But, you know, thanks for the ideas that you've offered us here today. Thanks so much to our subject matter experts for presenting the lay of the land. And, you know, I hope to stay engaged with you all. So thanks again and enjoy the rest of the conference.